All right. Thanks everyone for joining. So today we're going to quickly learn about open source governance processes and why they exist. And I'm sure you've seen the Bitcoin improvement proposals or the Ethereum improvement proposals with the EIPs and the associated ERCs. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the history and why do these exist and why do they make sense for open source crypto projects. And what is open source software? I just think this sort of framing is just super helpful in understanding the why this stuff exists. And then when you understand why the stuff exists, you can sort of map it onto everything else you see out there. And software, if we go back to like the 70s and 80s, 90s, software historically has been closed source. So companies are, making computers, they're making software, and they're doing it for revenue. And if they're going to develop some technology, why give it out for free? And so traditionally, a lot of software has been closed source. And why is the software closed source also? Well, it's IP developed by the company. It kind of doesn't make sense to open source it because then it's like, well, why should I give it out for free? And it's sort of seen as a moat. We still see like semiconductors are mostly fully closed source. And Apple, a lot of their software is closed source too. Google, I think, is the most progressive. Google and Facebook are, known for putting out open source frameworks now just because they're younger companies, perhaps. And so, yeah, software is traditionally closed source. And at some points, there was a open source movement. It was called the free software movement. And basically, everyone was saying, software is closed source, it's owned by companies. Why does it have to be that way? We should have software that is open, free. I should be able to design it. I should be able to have other people work on it to improve it, and we should be able to give it to each other for free. And new with a G and a U was the first real open source project, and it was designed to create a open source operating system, which is naturally where you start. And that's how we got Linux. And Linux is an open source software operating system. And this whole like open source movement, it just became a huge thing, right? Like we see it everywhere now. You can go into GitHub and you can put a search there for any kind of software that you'd want, and you can probably find it. And that's sort of like one of the beauties of this open source movement is like, I know that when I was learning to code, I taught myself, I was only able to learn how to code because I would go on GitHub, I would look at, all the software that was out there, and I would try to play around with it. I would try to like change it a little bit or sort of package it together with other pieces of software I would make to make an app. And I think it's just like a beautiful thing that everyone can sort of see the stuff and use it and learn and to sort of, it helps us get smarter, I think, as a software development society. And the thing is, if software is open source, let's say someone is using it in their own software, what if there's a bug now? Or what if, the OSs have now been upgraded and the software doesn't run on there anymore? Like, who's taking care of it? And so there has to be a process for improving this free open source software. And, one of the main problems is that it's free and you can use it for free. And so where's the incentive to work on that software? And, when Bitcoin came about, this was the first time sort of that there was open source software. And by holding the coin of this open source software, you can now, participate in the upside of it. The more you work on it, the better you take care of Bitcoin. Ideally, the more valuable it becomes. And in retrospect, that's what happened. And so what is the process for managing this open source software? And one of the first formal processes that we've seen is called the Python enhancement proposal. I'm sure everyone knows Python is a very popular language. There's Python, there's JavaScript, there's a bunch of other languages. And Python is open source. And if there's a software that everyone is using and a lot of different companies, a lot of different developers building different tooling have an interest in, there has to be a formal process for making the software better in a manner that all the stakeholders out there are going to be comfortable with. So for example, if I want to push a change to this open source software, it's going to break everyone else's software. It would probably be helpful to have a formal process so we can evaluate whether that's going to happen or not before I push my software out. And so formal processes are good. They just prevent against errors happening. They prevent against things breaking. And so they're a good thing. And Python sort of launched their enhancement proposal process. And their goals in doing this was that, before some software is pushed to the Python code base, it would be good to take a look at a specification. It would be good if people could specify what they're building, so anyone could sort of take a look and maybe have an opinion about it, maybe point out cybersecurity risks or point out any memory issues that might occur. And their enhancement proposal process also allows people to just propose new features. It allows people to have input. So if you're going to push a change to a code base that a lot of different people are using, there should be a process for also gathering their input. And it's also a process for just collecting, like before these version changes happen and the code goes out, it's good to have documentation about that decision and what was all the thinking behind it, what are all the concerns and all that stuff. And then, one thing that's very important in the Python enhancement proposal process is that it's on the author to build consensus and just document the issues that are coming up. And the reason is this stuff sort of gets stuck if one person isn't trying like super hard to push it through. And so one thing that's super important is that whoever puts out these enhancement proposal processes needs to see it all the way through, or they sort of die, they don't go anywhere. So let's take a deeper look. So what does this process even look like? So it's just a document. It's put in a repository online for everyone to see. And the different sections that the Python enhancement proposal process has is it has an abstract. What is the change that a particular developer wants to put out there, just in a few short paragraph. And what's the rationale? Why does this change need to happen? Why does it need to happen in a particular way? Or perhaps what are the concerns? The next section goes into sort of a specification or a body of the enhancement proposal. So what exactly does this person want to build? Typically, you'll see references. So what is is this change? Did it take any inspiration from other code bases? Is it using a process that was used somewhere else that worked really well that now should be incorporated here? And then just copyright info is something that goes at the footer. And let's take a look. Any questions while I'm bringing this up? Okay, so this is the Python enhancement proposal website. It's at peps.python.org. And a lot of different code bases have adopted this concept. And usually the first PEP or the first enhancement proposal or improvement proposal in the repo is typically defining the process itself. And so, anyone can sort of, if they're building, let's say a PEP 1000 is coming out, you know, that author should be able to go look at the first PEP and see, you know, how should this be structured, and use it basically as a reference. And so it's sort of helpful to have that. At the top, well, that doesn't work. At the top, we have just some basic high-level information. Here you have authors, the status of it. So sometimes these don't get through. So it might be helpful to know the status of it. Is it just being proposed? Has it been accepted? In this case, is it active? Has it perhaps fizzled out? So is it no longer being worked on? And so that's sort of important to know. And then types. This gets kind of more important when it gets into crypto and stuff, but these have different types. And so this is a process change. There could also be a code change. In crypto, it's kind of interesting in that code changes can have economic impacts. And that's something people can be very passionate about. And I'll talk a little bit later about, you know, how to think about that. But going a little bit deeper, so this is sort of their abstract. What is a PEP? The audience. And then the types. And so I was talking about how they have different types. So this is just a process recommendation that is being proposed to be accepted. Certain PEPs can be just informational if you have to code around a design perhaps, or code around a bug. And then standards track. So these are like the actual code changes that go in. So this is more similar to the Ethereum ERC standards. Here they have some workflow. So this is an outline of the bureaucracy involved in this particular development community. And so they have a little bit of a workflow. So a change is proposed. Then what happens? Who has to approve things? How long should this be out, perhaps? But a workflow is kind of important. And then this is just generic information on, you know, if you are submitting one for the first time, how does it look? All that stuff. So this isn't a good example if we're looking at, you know, what do these actually look like in practice? But let's fast forward, for example, to PEP 10. And so PEP 10 is, it looks like it's implementing some voting guidelines. So we have a new idea. How do we vote on it? And you can see this is sort of just a process, and all the issues aren't necessarily thought out yet. But here is a very simple voting process for changes that someone wants to introduce. And you can see the type is process. And some references, it looks like they adapted this concept from Apache. And so you have that in the references and copyright. So this sort of guides software changes before they get incorporated into the code base. Any questions before I keep going?
One quick question is, how important do you think it is to have a benevolent dictator for life, like Guido van Rossum for the PEP process, or any kind of enhancement process to work well?
Yeah, and that's something I think I'll conclude with. I think discipline is super, super important with these. And, you know, as people like ourselves that are just doing work day to day, or people that are out there, they may not either have the time to get into the details, or it might just not be something that we think about because we don't submit these things all the time. Or, you know, if someone that's proposing one of these things isn't as invested in the project as perhaps they should be. And so I think we see varying quality in things like this. And I think one of the things this process is designed to enhance is quality. So I think benevolent dictator is good with stuff like this. I think it's good to be opinionated, to make sure, you know, we have good discipline around stuff like this, and that it's following the proper process as well. Okay, let's keep going, and keep thinking of questions. I'll pause occasionally. Okay, so when Bitcoin came out, people realized, hey, it's kind of important for us to have a similar process, because you can't just have sort of random people just pushing changes, right? Especially if money is involved. And so Bitcoin is a very sensitive code base, and there's always a lot of contention around the changes. And that's a good thing. That means there's a lot of scrutiny around the code that's being pushed. It means people are thinking out the changes very deeply before they go out. And so the Bitcoin improvement proposal was introduced by Amir Taki. He's a hacker and activist, you could say, but he was a prolific coder, innovator, developer early on in the Bitcoin days, and he's still active in crypto. And he basically took the Python enhancement proposal, which was sort of one of the very major, well thought out processes at the time, and he designed the BIP. And one thing that's really important is software changes over time. Either the architecture is changing, or the tools we're using are changing, or something foundationally is changing. And so he sort of upgraded it, you could say, and adapted it to Bitcoin. So the workflow is, I would say, less bureaucratic, but is sort of more adapted to more of an open source Bitcoin type community. Backwards compatibility is a big thing. So if we're pushing code to a code base that's sort of setting the rules around our money, backwards compatibility is very important. So a couple times there have been algorithm changes for the keys or different styles of wallets that have been incorporated into the Bitcoin code base. But it would be bad, for example, if we changed how keys were generated and all of the old keys were now not usable. And so backwards compatibility is a huge thing for Bitcoin, just because you don't want people to just have their funds stuck. That would reduce the quality of Bitcoin and reduce the integrity of the project. Ownership transfer, super important. You know, people come and go. And so how do you think about that? It's a very natural thing. It's kind of hard to work on one thing for the rest of your life. And so ownership transfer is super important, just for making sure that Bitcoin is maintained not 5 years, 10 years from now, but also hopefully 50 years, 100 years from now. How do we think about the concept of ownership transfer over time? And so this came out, and it really became the standard for how crypto companies sort of guide their software changes. And so it's very popular with Bitcoin, very popular with Ethereum. I would say it is waning, but in terms of interest and people implementing it, but it is so important towards making sure that an open source project is managed properly, that it is open sourced, but it's also welcoming enough for new devs to come in and to enhance the project as well. And I just wanted to dive into the Bitcoin one a little bit. And here, let's take a look. So Bitcoin has their GitHub repo. And in here, they have the Bitcoin code base. And so this is the Bitcoin software itself. And we go here and we have BIPs. So you have the software and then the documentation around improving the software. And so here we have BIPs 0001. And I believe it's actually here. And here you have the author. And again, the first improvement proposal or enhancement proposal is really around why does it exist and how does it work? And oh, we can see this one was actually replaced. I didn't know that. Oh, it was replaced by BIP 2. Okay, so BIP 1 here, same thing, abstract, little bit of a specification, workflow, what does that look like? And this was sort of adapted into like the early Bitcoin Dev mailing list. So this Bitcoin Dev mailing list was how all the core devs would sort of discuss and coordinate changes. There have been a lot of heated discussions in that mailing list over time. The unfortunate thing is, I don't know if those emails are open source. It'd be cool if they were. They should be. And so that's sort of one thing that's moved to forums, you could say. So tools evolve over time. So mailing lists aren't really used as much, but forums are definitely used a lot more. And the good thing about a forum is everything is public. So anyways, he has some diagrams on the workflow, some recommendations on making sure it's successful, how to write the sort of the header at the top, et cetera, et cetera. And this is probably one of the big foundational things in crypto that sort of became a huge thing, and in terms of making sure Bitcoin is successful and it's governed properly. And here's some things to think about. So I think it's good to follow precedents. I think it's good to follow high quality projects. The thing is, the space evolves really fast. And because everything is open source, because there's money involved, the technological iteration on crypto has been really, really fast and really high. And so new tooling has come out. And so we have new governance tools like Tally for voting, there's Discourse, and these have been incorporated into how people do things today, and how they vote, how they talk about things. And it's good that we sort of are familiar with this tooling out there. But I think something that's super important is just looking forward. So yes, this BIP process is very good and I think very important, but how do we think about new tooling that comes out there? Because, you know, everyone gets excited about new things, and it's exciting to play around with sort of just the new tooling that's coming out and to explore it. And one thing that's, I think, important to think about is with a world where the tooling is evolving and people are being pulled in so many different directions in terms of organizational sort of like discipline and governance, how do we evolve with that tooling? So how do we make sure we have the backing of the discipline that we had before? And how do we sort of pull that evolving new tooling into those processes and look forward while keeping the lessons, you know, that we've sort of learned over time? And I think there's some other challenges as well. And so things like, you know, with Bitcoin, for the first time, there was now an economic incentive deeply tied to the code base. And, you know, with DeFi projects, it's not only payments, now it's loans, it's trading, it's futures, it's options. And so does this process need to sort of adapt in order to have people think out economic challenges as well? And so you have software, now you have economical impacts. And so how does this process need to evolve to sort of adapt to that? Other things are actually, this point is sort of the same thing. Yeah, just thinking about the economic impacts, I think is super important. So I think the block size debate was the most clear thing for me in Bitcoin. In July of 2015, someone started spamming the Ethereum network or the Bitcoin network to make the point that, hey, the Bitcoin block sizes need to become bigger because we want to have a lot of transactions in Bitcoin. And so there's a very contentious debate around increasing the block size of Bitcoin or keeping it the same. And I think that's a very good example of technical change carries an economic impact. Now, you know, the opinions that people have about it go exponentially higher. When it was just software, it was a very sort of a linear sort of thinking process. And now that there's an economic impact to me, for example, now maybe I'm going to have a huge opinion about what should happen with the code base. And so keeping that in mind, I think, is super important as well. And let's break for questions. Okay, great.
What do you think the core developer team could look like, or how many people do you think should be in that group, and how's that permissioned?
So I think if we look here, for example, let's see if they have the BIP editors anywhere. Editors. And so here they have 2 BIP editors. I think, Luke's been here for a long time, but I think the second one is newer. I think less is more here. So I feel like 2 might be a little too consolidated and centralized. And so, if I'm to think about this from the bottom up, I feel like 3 to 5 is good. And maybe some sort of consensus format would be good. Like, for example, let's say there's 5 people. 2 out of 5 people have to chime in on anything before it gets approved or before it gets moved along the process. I think something like that would be a good idea, because this seems a little too stringent and centralized to me. Cool. I think that's all the time we have for questions. But thanks so much for watching. I hope that was helpful, and please feel free to always reach out with any questions.
Thanks, Mason.